Welcome to a brand new episode of Law and Batting Order. I'm your host, Tony Iliakostas. Here are some quick hits from the past 2 weeks. Major League Baseball is known for enforcing a very strict drug testing policy, and that policy went into full effect these past 2 weeks as 2 notable baseball players were caught using performance-enhancing drugs. San Francisco Giants outfielder Melky Cabrera and Oakland Athletics pitcher Bartolo Colon both tested positive for synthetic testosterone and were subsequently suspended for 50 games each. Cabrera's crime seems more egregious as he attempted to cover up his offense by creating a fake website advertising the synthetic testosterone that he used. The federal government is currently looking into this matter, but in the meantime, Cabrera and Colon will not be playing for their respective teams for the remainder of the season. Sticking to doping, another notable athlete has fallen from glory. This past Friday, cycling champion Lance Armstrong dropped charges against the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. His charges claimed that he never tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs, but Armstrong decided to not contend the allegations made against him. The U.S. Anti-Doping Agency responded by proceeding to erase Armstrong from the cycling record books. Armstrong's 7 Tour de France titles have been erased, and he has been permanently banned from the sport of cycling. The Los Angeles Dodgers continue to make huge headlines since Magic Johnson and his investment group obtained ownership of the financially crippled franchise. On Saturday, following approval from Commissioner Bud Selig, the Dodgers struck a blockbuster trade with the troubled Boston Red Sox that sends Adrian Gonzalez, Carl Crawford, and Josh Beckett to Chavez Ravine for an array of prospects. In total, the Dodgers will be assuming approximately $250 million of salary from these 3 players. The Red Sox are in the middle of cleaning house after there were reports of locker room banter between various Red Sox players and manager Bobby Valentine. Nonetheless, the acquisition of these 3 players makes the Dodgers perennial World Series contenders. Today's Order in the Court will be deviating from topical sports law analysis and will be focusing on the sports agent profession. To give us an in-depth look at the life of a sports agent, it is my pleasure to introduce Darren Heitner to today's episode of Law and Batting Order. If you're a member of the sports law community, Darren really doesn't need an introduction, but for those of you who don't know who Darren is, he is a former sports agent and is currently an entertainment and sports attorney based in Miami, Florida. And Darren also teaches sports agency management at Indiana University Bloomington, is a Forbes.com contributor, and is also known for his work on his website, sportsagentblog.com. Darren, welcome to the program. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure. So, You were a former sports agent. You had time being a part of that area of sports law. You know, I guess the rudimentary, fundamental question that I want to ask you here is, what made you want to become a sports agent to begin with?
Well, it was really being in the right place at the right time and knowing that I was interested in sports growing up. My mom wanted me to be a sports doctor, but I can't even stand the sight of looking at blood. Got into high school debate, loved fashioning arguments, actually speaking publicly, and really enjoyed doing the legal research and tried to figure out a way that I could mix my passion for sports and my passion for the law. And it seemed at the time that being a sports agent would be maybe the natural path, or at least a suggested path for somebody that's interested in both fields. So that's what made me interested. And then I was lucky enough to have an internship with a very large sports and entertainment company that has and had an athlete representation division. I had that internship between my sophomore and junior year of undergrad. And after that, I was just convinced that it was a career path that I wanted to at least attempt.
Right, yeah. So then prior to ending your sports agent career and after you had a feel for the whole sports agent industry itself, what was a day like in the life of a sports agent? Was there a certain schedule or routine that you followed while you were a sports agent?
I imagine my typical day was very different than most sports agents. I created my agency right before I was about to graduate from undergraduate studies at University of Florida. So the startup phase was actually between graduating and then going into my first year of law school at University of Florida as well. I was there there for undergrad and for law. So my typical day was very different than most. I was sitting through classes as a 1L and as a 2L, as a 3L, also juggling owning the sports agent blog and whatever else was on my plate at the time. So my typical day was waking up, going to classes, doing whatever I could to recruit. I would still go visit athletes that had a lot of potential in an effort to recruit them. I certainly used social media to my advantage. I recall when I first started the company back in 2007, believe it or not, there was a company called Myspace that existed. And I don't want to say that it doesn't exist anymore, but I certainly don't use it. And I first started using it because there were a lot of athletes on there. And one of my very first baseball clients I came across through Myspace. So, my typical day was not the standard one. And when I started to gather clients, and it wasn't just trying to recruit and brand my company, it became reviewing contracts, reaching out to companies to try to get endorsement opportunities for my clients, etc.
So I guess, has MySpace reached out to you for a testimonial?
Believe it or not, I actually negotiated a deal once to get a company on one of my clients' top 10 lists. I don't know if you remember that on MySpace there was a box where...
Top 8, right?
Yeah, I think you could customize it to say how many different profiles you wanted up there. But I actually negotiated a deal to have a company placed on the top 10, top 8 list of one of my clients. So that was pretty innovative and a really interesting experience early in my career.
That's amazing, man. Wow. So, but in your years as a sports agent, what have been the advantages and disadvantages of the profession? I mean, I guess you were alluding to the use of social media, so I guess in that sense, that was one advantage where you were pretty much going outside of your boundaries within, I guess, the school confines, and you were reaching out to other athletes probably outside the area. But can you sort of explicitly mention what were the advantages and the disadvantages of being a sports agent?
In my specific position?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Well, when I started cold. I had an internship with another agency, but I hadn't actually been fully employed by any agency, and I had no clients under my belt that were signed to any representation agreement when I started my own company. So that was certainly a disadvantage. And certainly my age and lack of experience could be perceived as disadvantages as well. Advantages that I had were that I was publishing articles, not only on Sports Agent Blog, but also getting published in law reviews, law journals, regarding the sports agent industry and other areas in sports business that helped me establish myself as somebody who's knowledgeable in the field. And where youth could sometimes help is that I could really mesh with a lot of the players that I was recruiting and that I was representing, because I was either around their age or sometimes barely younger than them. And then in certain instances, with some of the high-profile professional bowlers that I represented, I was much younger than them. Mm-hmm. And that isn't necessarily an advantage. However, as you mentioned, I was starting my company when social media was just getting very hot. And I believe that my agency was the first sports agency that was on Twitter.
That's something.
We established ourselves on Facebook very early, and I think even though it's no longer an agency, we actually created a page that says #1 sports agents and advisors, and it still exists on Facebook. It doesn't do anything, but I think there's over 1,700 likes on that page alone, and so we took advantage of those opportunities, and certainly that enabled us to separate ourselves from the very many competitors that are in the space.
So now, I guess now let's also take it a little broader and let's look at the whole sports agent industry, and applying your personal experience to, I guess, the other average sports agent. Would you say that your advantages or disadvantages compared to the other ordinary sports agent out there, or do you notice some other varying differences between yourself and maybe the other ordinary sports agent out there?
Well, again, going back to what I stated, my lack of experience is something that others could use against me. And look, there's a lot to be said about experience in any industry. You can't discount that. And, as even in my practice as a lawyer, you're involved in more and more cases, you're involved in more and more matters, transactional matters, et cetera, and you always are learning. So my competition that maybe had 20, 30 years of experience in the business certainly could use that in their advantage to pitch athletes, but also maybe knew certain nuances here and there that could have helped their clients in the actual representation. So I think that's certainly an area that should never be discounted, and I know that my competition in any line of business will always use that to try to gain a competitive advantage.
Right. So now, as an athlete agent, when you were representing athletes, it was pretty much your role to speak on behalf of your client and pretty much get the best deal out there for your client. So was there, when you were, let's say, negotiating a contract for a baseball player, was there sort of a game plan that you had? What was your plan going into a negotiation? Were there certain rules or regulations that you had to follow as an agent?
Well, number one, whenever you go into a negotiation, the very first thing is that you need to be aligned with your client. You need to go over the process, go over strategy, go over tactics with your client so that they're not thrown off by anything, so that you have a uniform stance, and that you make sure you're representing the accurate interests of your client. Not only because it's your fiduciary duty to do so, but also you need to protect yourself because in case something goes wrong or the client gets a contract that has some problems in it, you don't want to set yourself up for potential liability down the line. Other than that, with regards to actually, being certified to do any sort of contract, with regards to marketing, there is no sort of mandatory certification. With regards to representing players in their contracts with professional teams, it varies by the sport. So for the team sports, there are players associations that do regulate agents, and for instance, with baseball, in the past you didn't have to get licensed unless you had a player on a 40-man roster. That was when I was representing players. So at the time, I was representing players, and I was advising players for the draft. I was also representing minor league players as they made their way up to the majors, and I did not have the need to get registered, which made it a little bit easier also when I determined that I wanted to take a step back from representation and actually focus my efforts on legal work. I didn't have to go and contact all these players associations to relinquish my license because I didn't have one. I was licensed with the state of Florida, which allowed me to recruit players, amateur players that were going into play professionally within my state.
Right, yeah. So now, in addition to negotiating on behalf of your clients, it appears that the average sports agent is also responsible for probably doing some public relations work in the case that a public relations crisis comes about. And I guess sort of tying in very nicely was the recent Chad Ochocinco Johnson, whatever his name is these days, the recent arrest and subsequent cut, who's released from the Dolphins. And obviously now he's also being divorced from Ava Lozado. But, he also released an apology yesterday on his website and on his Twitter. Do you think that was the working of his agent? Was his agent influential in that? Is that something that you had to do as a sports agent, where if there was a public relations crisis, you had to step in and wear the PR hat instead of legal hat and, help your client rectify his image?
It depends on the player. When we're talking about a Chad Johnson, he has an agent. He has attorneys. For instance, he has a criminal defense attorney that represented him with regards to this incident that you're talking about with his wife or soon-to-be former wife. He also likely has a separate public relations specialist and many other people that are in his quote-unquote business team, which will include a financial advisor, an accountant, etc. Now, when we're talking about players that are not at the same level as Chad Johnson economically or with regards to the amount of press that he gets, those types of players typically will not have a separate public relations specialist that they have on retainer. And in that type of situation, agents do often find themselves not only wearing the hat of contract negotiator, but also as somewhat of a PR entity making sure that doing damage control, but also publicizing the efforts of the player, because positive press can drive up a player's marketability. It's certainly something that teams look into. Would a team rather have somebody who has 5,000 articles that are written about that person in a positive light, or 10 articles that are written about that person in a negative stance? Obviously the positive. So the agent certainly will look to do whatever he or she can do to bolster his or her client's credibility within the media. But as I mentioned, it depends on the type of player, whether or not they have someone specific outside of the agent who's dealing with PR issues.
Right. So now, aside from being a sports agent, you're also known for your website, sportsagentblog.com, and it really is a highly successful blog for any of our viewers who haven't checked it out. Link will be below in the description box. Darren, how has sportsagentblog.com helped you enter the sports law arena? And I guess you had also mentioned that this sort of helped you segue into the sports agent arena because you were young and you were slowly getting into the business. Can you tell us a little bit about sportsagentblog.com?
It's been a tremendous blessing for me personally and professionally. Started it in 2005 as a New Year's resolution, and I actually met somebody who would become a contributor for Sports Agent Blog, who ended up becoming the co-founder of my agency when we started it. I eventually did purchase the agency from him and managed it myself, but without Sports Agent Blog, I would have never met him, and really, he was the one who pushed me to create the agency, and I thank him for that.
Of course, yeah.
And then beyond that, I have to tell you, even in my legal practice, owning, managing, running that website has led to many client referrals. As I said earlier, it bolsters my credibility. It bolsters my knowledge about the sports agent industry. It's allowed me to become a contributor to Forbes.com, and that has been another tremendous blessing. So I'm very thankful and I'm appreciative of the opportunities that I've garnered from the creation of that website. Back in 2005, there was a stigma towards the word blog. And it's kind of funny now, with blog being a part of the title, that stigma doesn't seem to still exist. And I don't think that it takes any credibility away from the website. And, at first when it was just friends and family reading it, to now, I'll tell you, I don't know a single practitioner in the sports agent industry who can honestly say he or she has never read it or at least heard of it.
Right.
It's amazing.
That's something, and congrats to you, obviously, on that achievement. So now, in retrospect, again, now this is all, you becoming a sports agent happened while you were in law school, but in retrospect, now that you're an accomplished attorney now, you're working in the sports law arena and entertainment arena, do you see attending law school as an essential element to being a sports agent, or even just being a part of, I guess, that agency realm, whether it's sports or you're representing a celebrity, or could you have foregone the whole law school thing to begin with?
Well, am I answering that from a personal perspective or in general?
You can answer that personally. In your sense, in your case, you became an agent. How old were you when you became an agent?
22.
Okay, so were you in the middle of law school at that point? And could you have just dumped law school out of the window and just gone on to be an agent without the law school thing?
It probably would have been a lot easier if I wasn't in law school, because I would have been able to dedicate more time to trying to build my practice.
Right.
The answer as to whether or not law school is something that will help somebody get into being a sports agent, or at least being a successful sports agent, law school won't be the reason why somebody is successful. Typically, the reason why somebody's successful in the sports agent industry is because that person either catches a great break by joining an established agency and gets a great experience there and works his or her way up the ladder, or has a connection to a big player or multiple players, and those players put their trust in that person, who then either brings those players to an established agency or tries to start one up himself. So I'm not. Going to law school allows you to, one, obviously learn the law, and two, allows you to think differently than you would otherwise. And I'm sure you understand this as a law school student. It really opens your mind into not coming up. There is no right and wrong. There's no yes and no. There's a lot of gray area, and there's a lot of things that can be argued. You can tear apart almost every word in every sentence and argue that once you become a lawyer. And I think that's a lot of people hate us for that, but I think it's something that really allows us as lawyers to have an advantage over maybe non-lawyers in the way that we can negotiate deals.
Sure.
So also, one thing to point out is that not all agencies want to hire agents or people into an agent capacity that are also lawyers. And sometimes agencies prefer that. So it all depends on who you're talking to in the industry.
Right. So finally, based on your experience as a sports agent, what advice would you give to any aspiring sports agents out there who are watching this episode?
Well, one, never take no as an answer. It is one of, if not the most difficult industries to break into. If you're fully committed, find a way in. How do you find a way in? It's not going to be a resume. It's not that you went to Yale Law School or Harvard Law School. It's going to be either you know somebody high up at an agency, or you do something where you really show that you can think outside of the box and bring value. Or I guess third, that again, you're connected to an athlete or multiple athletes with a lot of potential, and you can actually bring them to the table once you join that agency. 1 in 3, where you know somebody at the agency or you're bringing players with you, there's not much you can do about that. Once you get to that point, you either have those connections or you don't. But the second part, where you think outside of the box, that's really in your control. And it's all about the value that you'll add. So, there's a lot of people who are willing to break into this industry or get a chance in this industry and almost pay an agency for that opportunity. So you have to be willing to take whatever the agency will give you as a salary and bust your butt.
That's it, yeah. And definitely that's the way to have. That's the attitude to have, rather, when you're in a very cutthroat industry like, I guess, the sports law arena, where it's all about connections, it's all about networking, it's all about being in the right place at the right time. But Darren, great stuff. If you want to know more about Darren, all his information will be down below in the description box. Darren, thank you for being on Law and Batting Order.
Thanks for having me.
That's the show. Leave all your comments down below, and be sure to visit Law and Batting Order at lawandbattingorder.com, as well as on Facebook and Twitter. Take care, guys.